Does Ukraine have a neo-Nazi problem?
My understanding is there are Nazis in Ukraine. And there are supporters of white supremacy theories. But also my understanding is that they're extremely marginal, and they're more marginal than the same sort of groups are in Central Europe, maybe in the US as well. And for me, the question is not whether the Ukraine has it, but why, even in the conditions of the war, the radical nationalism and extremism and white supremacist is such a marginal force. When in the countries that are not at the war, you look at France, you look at, again, it's not exactly Nazism, but really radical right is becoming so important. Why Ukraine in the conditions of the war is the country that manages relations between different ethnic groups and languages in the way that strengthens political nation. So for me as a scholar and a researcher, what I see is that in Ukraine, the influence of the far right in different variations is much lower than it is among some of Ukraine's neighbors and in Europe in general. And the question is why. I don't know. I have guesses. I don't know answer. But that's the question that I think is interesting to answer. How Ukraine ended up to be the only country in the world outside of Israel who has a Jewish president, who is, my at least understanding is, the most popular president in history in terms of how long his popularity goes after the election. So these are the really, from my point of view, interesting questions. And again, we can certainly debate that.
So just for context, the most popular far right party won 2.15% of the vote in 2019. This is before the war, so that's where things stood. It's unclear where they stand now. It'd be an interesting question whether it escalated and how much. What you're saying is that war in general can serve as a catalyst for expansion of extremist groups, of extremist nationalistic groups, especially like the far right. And it's interesting to see to what degree they have or have not risen to power in the sort of in the shadows.
So no nationalist or nationalistic party actually crossed the barrier to get into the parliament.
Yes.
So Ukraine is the country where there is no right or far right in the parliament. We can't say that about Germany. We can't say that about France. So that's just one more way to stress this unique place of Ukraine in that sense. And the year 2019 is the year already of the war. The war started in 2014 with the annexation of the Crimea. The front line was near Donbass. All these groups were fighting there. So Ukraine, maybe not to a degree that it is now, was already on the war footing, and yet the right party couldn't get more than 2%. So that's the question that I have in mind. And yes, the war historically, of course, puts forward and makes from the more nationalist views and forces, turn them from marginal forces into more central ones. We talked about Bandera and we talked about Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. They were the most marginal group in the political spectrum in Ukraine in the 1930s that one can only imagine. But World War II comes and they become the most central group because they also were from the start they knew they had the organization, the violence was basically one of their means, they knew how to fight. So historically wars indeed produce those results. So we are looking at Ukraine, we are trying to see what is happening there.